This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. This is The Creative Life podcast with James Taylor, episode number 5. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. Hey, it's James Taylor, and I'm excited today to bring you our guest, Chris Ducker. This is a gentleman I've been looking forward to speaking to for a long time. Chris is a serial entrepreneur, author, blogger, podcaster, and virtual CEO. He is the number one authority on the subject of virtual staffing and personal outsourcing, and his 3 businesses in the Philippines today employ over 450 people. Chris's team has helped myself and a number of musician, author, and entrepreneur friends build virtual teams that help them leverage their creativity. So Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So share with our listeners what's going on in your world just now.
Oh, man, I'm an entrepreneur, right? So we always have a lot going on, but it's, right now the focus is youpreneur.com. It's the personal brand business building community that I launched last year. We're about 6-7 months in already, 400 plus members in there, and we're just loving it. We're loving the feedback from people, the support that everybody's giving each other, the accountability actually that's built in with the community is probably the number one draw. And so everyone's loving it. That is where the focus is really for this year, to be honest with you. That's kind of going to be my mainstay for this year for sure.
And we definitely want to dive into that in a minute, because that's, I think, for a lot of our listeners, what you're doing with the Youpreneur and the community around that, I think, is really key in it. And it fits in with a lot of things that I hear a lot of our listeners really yearn for as well. But before we kind of get into that, take us back a little bit. How did you kind of learn your craft as an entrepreneur and as a marketer as well?
Well, at the very kind of core of what I do, I'm just a sales guy, and I don't try and hide that in any way whatsoever. I was born and raised in Wimbledon, back in London, and I was in the publishing business from my kind of late teens as a part-time telesales guy with Auto Trader right the way through till my late 20s when I left the UK and came here to the Philippines. And that's what that's the core of what I am. I'm a sales and marketing guy, everything from classified ad space to, selling internet banner advertising when it was really cool and trendy to do that, right the way down to front page, advertising booths at large conferences at Earl's Court and Olympia and places like that. So that's really at the very core, that's all I am, just a very simple sales guy. That's it.
And when did the entrepreneurial bug bite? When did it go from you working for other people to saying, actually, I want to create my own thing?
Well, actually, because I was in the Philippines for a while helping other businesses set up call center facilities here and kind of representative offices and things like that. And I became very good at it, quite frankly. And I could put it together quickly. I had the right contacts in place and all the rest of it. And I was working as a consultant for an infomercial business with a company over in Miami, Florida. And I'd been there for about a month or so. And the guy who I was working with is a very, very nice guy, like super cool guy away from work. We're talking, floor seats at the Heat game, VIP tickets to the Super Bowl, all that sort of stuff. It was great. But working for him was a nightmare. And after a month of being in Miami with him, I decided on my way back home at 37,000 feet that I was done making money for him and for anybody else. And I wrote my resignation letter out as his kind of full-time consultant for international distribution. And a month and a half later, started work on my own businesses.
And at that point, did you have any kind of peer group around you, other kind of entrepreneurs that you could go to for advice and say, I'm thinking about doing this, or I'm going to do this. What's some of the pitfalls? Did you have those folks around you?
Just 1 or 2 people, nothing crazy.
Yeah.
See, here in the Philippines, generally speaking, you either are a very well paid executive with a large international firm over here, or you're already running your own thing. And if you're running your own thing, you're not out socializing all that much. plain and simple. And so I didn't get the chance to meet that many people that were already running their own businesses. And although I knew, a few people back in England that were doing so, the communication was a little tough at times because of the time differences and everything. But no, ultimately, it was very much kind of roll up your sleeves and let's get your hands dirty sort of type of mentality. And that's exactly what I did. And I think probably coming from that sales background, it kind of allowed me to kind of be a little ballsy and a little bit kind of overconfident maybe, and just sort of say, I'm just going to do this. If it fails, it fails. No big deal. I'll, lick my wounds and come back stronger. But lucky for us, it didn't fail. And,
like most entrepreneurs, you've got lots of projects and you've also got lots of ideas that are probably coming to you all the time as well. Your projects now, you've got Upreneur, you've got the podcast, Tropical Think Tank, there's a number of things you've got going on. So questions there, first of all, where do some of these ideas come from initially? Where do you kind of go to get these ideas? And more importantly, because usually ideas are normally not the big issue, it's more in terms of how you decide and prioritize which ones are worth pursuing.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, just like anybody, I have a lot of ideas, a lot of project, potential and opportunities come my way just because of the position that I'm in today, opportunities that I wouldn't have got, 5, 6, 10 years ago. But the fact is that, when we say yes to something, we're ultimately absolutely and straight away saying no to something else. And so I'm very, very careful with what I decide to work on and what I don't work on nowadays. But the majority of the ideas for these events, for, the communities that I create and manage, for just blog posts and podcast content, from keynote, from books, whatever it is, all of it really comes from my audience. It comes from my now very active community. I'm a big believer that you've got to listen to your audience, and ultimately, once you've built up enough rapport and trust with them, again, maybe I'm a little ahead of the curve than some people because of my sales background on that, but once you have that rapport and that trust with them, they really do open up to you, and they'll tell you what their struggles are. They'll tell you what they need help with the most, and then it's up to you as the entrepreneur to go ahead and create the solutions to those problems. And the good news is if you do it well enough, you get to put the price tag on it and everybody's happy.
This thing you said just there, though, about saying no and saying if I do this, then it means I cannot do the other things. This is obviously something that a lot of creators really struggle with, especially early on in their career when maybe the opportunities aren't there. And so they're saying yes to everything. And then there kind of comes a point where they're still in yes mode to everything, but then they don't have the time and they're kind of spreading themselves too thin. Has that ever a point in your life, has there been times where you've maybe struggled with kind of overcommitting or not saying no, or thinking, or kind of having a remorse and maybe having said no to something, but you think, I should have said yes to that?
Yeah. Well, the good news is when you follow your gut, it'll very rarely let you down. You know what I mean? Like you'll regret saying yes way more than you will do saying no, I found anyway. And so, there's been plenty of times when I've overextended myself, and you feel burnout creeping up on you, and you've got to dial right back. It's tough, because we're wired to act quickly. As entrepreneurs, we're not wired necessarily to sit back and really kind of look at everything with a fine-toothed comb. We want to act quickly. We want to, how many times have you got an idea in the shower and you want to run out and register a domain name straight away? It happens all the bloody time. Yeah. So it's tough to say no. But I think that also as we get stronger as entrepreneurs, as our personalities begin to shape, and we become a little more confident and a little bit more focused on us and understanding that we are truly the be-all and end-all of our business at the end of the day, at that point it becomes a lot easier to say no. But it's hard. It certainly is hard, that's for sure. And
this thing you mentioned just there about sometimes maybe having overcommitted or I mean, how do you deal with times in your life where you've maybe felt overwhelmed by the number of projects, number of maybe commitments you've got to do, the community that you've got to serve, and thinking, I've kind of created this thing. I need to see it through. How do you deal with that sense? Maybe you don't have it. Maybe I'm completely wrong here. But if you do have it, how do you deal with that sense of perhaps overwhelm?
Well, I don't think. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think I have it anymore. And the reason why is because I have experienced it before in the past. But really, for the last 3 or 4 years, I haven't really got to that position. But honestly, when the overwhelm hits, that's when you've got to take a very clear step back. When you're feeling that overwhelm, when you're feeling that burnout, starting to slowly but surely take over, you must hit the pause button. You've got to take a step back, and you've got to then start making notes and prioritizing projects and relationships. And they're the toughest things for me to prioritize still to this day, because I want to be everybody's buddy. You know what I mean? I want to help everyone, and I want to be helped by everyone. And so it's tough. Sometimes you've just got to sit back and prioritize. And that is my number one piece of advice for anybody that's feeling that overwhelm is sit back, brew yourself a nice cuppa, get a piece of paper and a pen out, and start working on what you're struggling with. And that right there becomes that virtual brain dump that I think a lot of entrepreneurs, particularly creatives, are quite scared to make, because they realize at the end of that, that exercise, that they're going to have to make choices. They have to. Otherwise, the exercise itself has been a waste of time. So that's honestly what it is. It's about hitting the pause button, stepping back, and having a look at where you're at.
And in your book, Virtual Freedom, you spoke very eloquently about that point in your life where you kind of got to that thing of just saying, okay, enough. I need to I need to kind of work out some of these priorities here. And one of the things you decided at that point, and it's a great book, and it's probably my most recommended book of last year. I think I either gave it to lots of people or I recommended it to lots of people last year. And one of the things that you talk about that is in terms of becoming a virtual CEO and building these virtual teams. Now, I see this all the time. For even my own business, I've got a small team of, say, I think it's 5 or 6 folks now who work with me as a virtual team, and many of them are based in the Philippines as well. But that book was great because it really set it out in a very, very clear way. And now I hear lots of musicians and artists and writers and entrepreneurs who are building their own teams as well. So is there any advice that you would give to someone that's listening just now that's kind of got a number of projects on the go that realizes they need help, they need to put together a team around what they're trying to do to kind of get their music and get their message out there more widely? Is there any advice that you would give them in terms of maybe building or starting to build that virtual team?
Yeah, in the book I mentioned the 3 lists of freedom exercise. And this is what I did when I burned out at the end of 2009. I went away with my wife to a nice resort here for a couple of nights. No laptops, no devices or anything like that. We just checked in and we were trying to figure out, how in the hell am I going to remove myself from my business day to day? So I'm not working these 16, 17-hour days, burning the candle at both ends 6-7 days a week. And so, throughout the course of that weekend, I started making notes on, you get the beer napkins and, this, that, and the other, and the notepad next to the phone in the room and all that stuff. And when we got back home, we kind of spread this out all over the table and we started to group it into 3 very distinct lists. Now, I'd like to say, James, that this was all 100% planned, but it wasn't. There was no sexy name that we gave it, like the 3 list of freedom. Like, it was all very sexy, right? But it wasn't that sexy when we were doing this. And ultimately, what happened was we had came up with these 3 solid lists, very clear and different lists, where we had put all these different tasks into. And the first list was a list of things that, quite frankly, I hate doing. But my business was demanding that I do it because of the way that I run my business day to day. And I would procrastinate on these things. And a lot of times I would rush them, I'd screw up and all the rest of it. So list number 1, list of all the things that we hate doing. List number 2 is a list of all the things that we can't do or that we struggle doing. Now, it's hard to admit when we can't do something, particularly type A, individuals like entrepreneurs, musicians, all these kind of people that really truly do believe that the universe revolves around us. And it's a very hard list to put together. But understand that if you are struggling with something, if there's something that you cannot do properly, there's somebody out there that can do it for you, and at a great level as well, better than what you can probably. So that was the second list. And then the third list was easily by far the most important. And it was the hardest list to put together because contrary to list 1 and 2, I might actually like doing some of these things. I might actually be very, very good at doing some of these things. But that third list was made up of things that I felt that as the entrepreneur that I was, I shouldn't actually be doing. Like my time could be better spent on more high-level activities, if that makes sense. And so that was how we created the 3 list of freedom. It's at the beginning of virtual freedom. It's in the middle. It's at the end. And it's everywhere else in between. It's one of the most important exercises that I've ever done as a business owner myself. And anybody that's feeling that overwhelmed should all sit down and make those 3 lists.
And something I've heard a couple of times from people that have kind of started on the journey, and this is probably more, maybe a lot of folks would have read, like say Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Work Week, when he first, you mentioned using a virtual assistants, and people kind of put their toe in the water. They started on it, or they go in and they hire someone full time, and for whatever reason, it doesn't work out, and then they immediately say, well, that virtual team, that doesn't work. That's not going to work. So that is a relatively kind of common thing from a lot of people you hear that have maybe have done it. What are some of the things that you find that they maybe don't get right when first kind of going around starting to either get their first virtual assistant or start to build a virtual team?
Yeah, it's funny. 9 times out of 10, when this doesn't work out for people to begin with, it's usually down to them, not the VAs. And they make 2 cardinal errors, and I see these pop up over and over and over and over again. Number 1 is that they assume that one person can do the job of 5 people. So, I call it the myth of the super VA, where they think they can hire one person to do web design, web development, which are 2 totally different animals, by the way. Just because you can use Photoshop doesn't mean that you can bloody code, right? So, they want someone to handle their audio editing, their video editing. They want someone to do graphic design. They want someone to do, SEO for them and all this other type of stuff that we need to run successful online businesses. They expect one person to be able to do all of that. And it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work like that way in real life. Why should it work that way in the virtual world either? So that's the first thing, is that super VA mentality of hiring one person to do a number of different people's jobs. And then the second mistake that they make is when they do bring somebody on board, they expect that they can just pop that pill and have everything work perfectly right out of the gate. It doesn't happen that way. You must spend time onboarding your new employee. You must, even if they've got the skill set, even if they've got the experience, even if they've got the personality and the attitude where they're going to work well within you and your company culture, they've never worked for you before. They don't know how you like things done. They don't know that you like Times Roman font size 12 and green and blue. They think that you like Arial 10, pink and purple. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you must spend time. You must spend time onboarding somebody properly. And once they get into the groove and you've built up some processes and everybody's happy and things are working well, then you can start stepping away a little bit one by one.
And I remember, you talked about this, I think you called it the trifecta. We have the tools that are now available to us, through video, through recording our screen shares, so we can share that with our team member, or through just writing out in terms of kind of standard operating procedures, or just very kind of quick things like Slack as well, to be able to kind of communicate with your team members. It's I think that's one of the things that I found speaking to a lot of folks that have maybe started on it but kind of gave up too early. One is that, as you say, they didn't get the training part right, or they didn't invest any time in training, and just start to. I mean, when people have said to me about hiring VAs or before, I've said, well, the first thing is spend a month beforehand just documenting what you're currently doing in video or some other form, and then when you start spreading out those things, you get a lot of clarity. But as you said, that the idea of this one VA that's going to do everything, but if someone was to kind of get their very first assistant, someone to help them, whether they're, let's say if they're an author, they maybe need help on social media and different things they're doing, or they're a musician, someone they're needing help on organizing their email and their calendar and everything that they're doing there. Who would you suggest that very first VA is? What kind of role should that person have?
It's a general VA. That's genuinely a general VA. And that was a term, as far as I know, I coined to really bring on board somebody that can handle your calendar, that can handle your blog management, that can handle your day-to-day appointments, that can handle, your social media, research of posts and posting and all that sort of type of stuff. Someone that can handle maybe a little bit of inquiries via email with canned responses and that kind of thing. This is not a super VA. I want to clarify that again. This is somebody that is there. It's like your Gal Friday type. It's very incredibly unpolitically correct there, but just somebody who can be there, that sitting by your side virtually, of course, but somebody that will help you with the day-to-day running, supporting, and growing of your business. And there are some amazing general VAs out there, as you probably know yourself. And we're not talking about time savers here. Yes, they save you time, which is obviously by far our most valuable commodity, but they also are lifesavers. I mean, I have known people that have literally read my book, emailed me, a year later and said, Chris, you have no idea. Like, I was on the verge of a freaking heart attack. I hired these 2-3 people, and now I work, 30 hours a week instead of 70 hours a week. And I actually have got to know my wife again. That's life-changing stuff. Absolutely.
And, with what you're doing with Upreneur is very interesting because unlike a lot of marketers, entrepreneurs I see out there in the space, you don't pay lip service to this idea of community. It's not just creating a Facebook group and then kind of letting it do its own thing. You genuinely believe in this idea of community, and I think that's what's quite useful probably for a lot of our listeners, where if you're an artist, you're a musician, you're a writer, community is actually very, very important. Your fans, your fan base is very, you talk about this, the 1,000 true fans kind of concept as well. Mm-hmm. To take us through, what is your kind of approach to building communities around your brand, around your ideas?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's important to understand that your vibe will attract your tribe. And when we talk about communities online, the term tribe is used quite a bit. I'm a big believer of that. You've got to be yourself. You can't hide behind, smoke and mirrors. That this is very, very important, particularly if you're a creative type folk. Whether you're a musician or an artist or an author or a speaker or whatever bucket you want to place yourself into. The fact is that people want to do business with other people, more so today than ever in the history of Western civilization, as far as I'm concerned. The brands will always want to do business with other brands. You know what I mean? But people want to do business with other people, more so today than ever. And that's why that P2P connection that I'm always advocating so much is so darn important. And what better way to do it and to build that through building a community of people that truly love what you're all about and what you stand for and those that you want to serve. And that for me is the biggest fundamental of building a community based around you and what you're all about, is understanding that your vibe will attract your tribe. You don't have to try and please all the people all the time. It's okay to ruffle a few feathers. It's okay to upset a few people, because if you do that, they probably wouldn't end up being your customer anyway. So, the analogy I use is marketing like a magnet. So you've got to attract the best. So the best prospects for you, the best prospective customers and tribe members for you, and then repel the rest. So attract the best, repel the rest, because you don't need those negative people that will end up, just bringing you down or end up not spending any money and just sucking your time.
And with Youpreneur, obviously, it's relatively early just now as well. And I know a lot of the subscription sites I was involved in creating online schools, and some have become very, very big, very successful, thousands and thousands of members for them. It seems to be that a lot of people joined initially for the content because they wanted to learn that particular thing, but they stayed for long periods of time because of that community aspect as well. How in your head, when you were kind of creating and now you're kind of managing and maintaining and building Youpreneur, how did you kind of think about those two things, like the content piece and then the community piece, and was there kind of balance around those?
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I hold Tropical Think Tank, which is my annual entrepreneurial retreat here in the Philippines each year. It's very high end. There's just 50 slots, and we film every single keynote. There's 9 keynotes each year, and we film them all in HD. And I've never done anything with the footage other than just share it with the speakers. And so we knew that was going to be part of the content. We knew that. And this is a $4,000 ticket, by the way. This isn't a cheap conference to attend. So that in itself is worth, the membership, whether you sign up on monthly or annual for that matter. But we do also understand and appreciate the fact that you've got to deliver new content on a regular basis as well. And going into Youpreneur, I knew that, this is going to be a community that I'm ultimately building based around my own authority. And people might end up actually joining just because of the relationship that they have with me and wanting to build that relationship. And I'm fine with that. But I also was acutely aware of the fact that I didn't want to overextend or stretch myself too much on a regular basis either. So although we have the Tropical Think Tank archive in there and we add to it every year as the event obviously happens, we also have 2 live mastermind calls every single month as well. And these are calls where members can get on with me. They can fire anything at me. But I also have a very clear understanding as to some of the other members and what they can help their fellow Youpreneurs with as well. So quite regularly, I'll unmute 2 or 3 people and let them have like a conversation for 5 or 10 minutes. And here's a beautiful thing. When you're listening in on mastermind calls like that, nobody has a monopoly on good ideas.
Yeah.
Even if you're in a completely different industry, you're going to get ideas. You're going to be, inspired and motivated to take action. And so we do 2 of those every month. And then we have our private members-only forums as well, where day-to-day everybody's in there conversing with each other. So it was a balance, I guess, really of understanding that, yes, they wanted a bit of me, and that's fine. But also, I'm not going to burn out because of it. So we went in knowing that this was what we were going to do. This was where the focus was going to be. We didn't have any delusions of grandeur about what we could deliver, and we're focusing. And like you said, we're still very much in its infancy, 6 months in, but very, very happy with the results so far.
Awesome. And share some of the best advice that you've ever received from other people about being a successful entrepreneur, and also kind of being happy, I suppose, with what you do as well. Because I suppose there's things about being successful, maybe from the outside, and also being kind of happy about what you're doing and content with your life and joyful. That maybe they can often not always the same thing. So, what's some of the best advice that you've received about being an entrepreneur?
Well, it's funny, years and years ago, I was at a dinner party in Manila here in the Philippines. I was invited over. It was quite an exclusive sort of get together. 12 people at a very well-to-do house in Manila. And I was sitting opposite an American guy named Tom, who was in the the corporate awards world, the awards that they give away each year. Now, we're not talking about your little plastic, resin sort of type of award that, some companies give out each year and think that it makes a difference. We're talking about awards that are worth, to make 15, 20 grand a pop, bronze, brass, eagles, all this sort of stuff. And, glowing, glowing tigers, all this sort of stuff. And and very, very successful guy, multi-millionaire, very successful guy. And he was probably in his early 60s at the time. I just literally had coffee with him about 2 weeks ago. He's now in his early 70s, or at least very late 60s for sure. Still in business, still doing well, still loving life. And I asked him, how can I have what you have? Now, what do I need to do to get to where you are? And he said, easy reply. Are you ready for this? Here it is. Take notes, Chris, because this is worth, this is $1 million worth here of advice. Okay, I'm ready to go. It goes, you need to work 15 hours a day for 5 years with no holidays. And I was like, that's it? Like, I just have to work myself like into an early grave? That's it? No, I'm not. He said, no, that's the old way of doing it. Nowadays, things have changed. Now you've got the internet. Now you've got CRMs. Now you've got staff that you can hire and all this other stuff. Now, understand, this is like 10 years ago. He basically just reaffirmed the fact that I knew that if I wanted to become successful, I'd have to work my butt off, plain and simple. But also, at the exact same time, he very clearly stated the fact that times are changing, and they're always changing. And that's one of the reasons why I love doing what I do every day, because you never quite know what's around the corner, and it really hit home. The idea of hard work is nothing new. We hear a lot of people talk about the grind and the hustle and all this stuff, and I'm down with all that, trust me, but you don't need to give it a cool term. Just work hard is what it is. It's what it's been known as for decades, right? Hundreds of years, in fact. So, really, it just reaffirmed that, to be successful, you've just got to work hard. But I think, more importantly, nowadays, you're in a position where you can work smart.
Yeah.
And, I've gone from doing those really long hours to now Monday to Thursday. I haven't worked a Friday for 3 years, and I'm very proud to say that. And my wife loves me for it. And I work, like 6 hours a day during Monday to Thursday, and that's it. And our business is bigger than it ever has been and more profitable than it ever has been. So there's a lot to learn from both sides, I think.
And it's an interesting one, also culturally, the thing of work hard is obviously is pushed very strong in the American dream. Actually, I would say also in the UK, we're probably more similar to America than some of our European cousins in terms of that work ethic thing. And being a Scot, we have a certain kind of Calvinistic work ethic as well.
Well, I think it's becoming really mainstream now. The whole, you've got to, I think the UK is ripe for a really, really interesting entrepreneurial push in the next 5 years or so, because everybody seems to be more and more on that bandwagon whenever I'm back home.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what's interesting as well, though, is I had a previous guest on who was talking about efficiency of practicing. So this is an artist, a musician that works with some of the top orchestras in the world, top musicians in the world, and he said, okay, everyone's going to be practicing 3 hours a day in this case. So it's not about the length of time that they're practicing, but the efficiency of that time that they're actually putting in. That's what's going to separate out the good from the great performers as well.
Absolutely.
So I think it's that thing of the time that you are spending, that Monday to Thursday, the efficiency, and I know you're very strong in terms of you working with your calendar to be as efficient with your time as possible. I think that's the other part. It's not just the working hard, as you say. It's the working smart part.
No, I mean the one thing that I truly do live by every single day is that if it doesn't get scheduled, it doesn't get done. So, you mentioned my calendar, like every single little thing that I need to do is on my calendar. You look at my calendar at any one time, you think that I'm burning myself into an early grave. It's not like that. It's about being extremely regimented with my time and maximizing my time. 15 minutes for email on the schedule, 20 minutes for a phone call on the schedule, 10 minutes for Twitter on the schedule. And it's not for everybody. That kind of way of working. It's not for everybody. But for me personally, I've really engaged and embraced that over the last couple of years. And I get more done now in 6 hours a day than I ever did before when I started building my businesses. And it's mainly due to that mantra of if it doesn't get scheduled, it doesn't get done.
So just finishing up here, talking about tools and things. Obviously, I'm imagining that Google Calendar or whatever your calendar is a pretty important tool for you. But are there any other tools that are really not just critical to what you do, but also you really enjoy using as well?
I mean, for me, there's a couple of tools that I use every single day that I just physically could not live without. Rather, the first thing is just the whole Google Apps suite. So, Google Drive, Gmail, G Calendar, you just can't, I can't do business without them. Plain simple. Amazing. They just make everything so easy on a day-to-day basis. Slack, you mentioned before. We introduced Slack about 1.5 years ago into our business, and it's all but eliminated probably around 80% of internal email, which is great because I detest email. Anything I can do to avoid it, I will do it. So Slack has been gold. Skype is still great, but not used as much now because of Slack. But Skype is great. I mean, we're using it right now to record this, obviously. And just from a day-to-day perspective, the one little app that I use all the time is called Focus at Will.
Yeah,
and you can get it at focusatwill.com. Have you used it yourself?
I'm using it. I've got it on my browser just now. It's awesome app.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, and it's like $300 for a lifetime membership. It's a no-brainer. Yeah. And they just sort of combine it for those listening in that don't know what it is. It's a productivity tool based on music, basically. So they have like classical and ambient and whatnot, and you listen to it, and apparently it kind of keeps you focused on the present task more so than just listening to regular music or no music at all. And that's really, honestly, they're kind of my mainstay day to day. That's what I use.
Great. And we'll put links to our listeners if they go to jamestaylor.me. We'll have all the links to all this in the show notes if you just put in Chris Ducker's name as well. So if you could recommend just one record or book to our listeners, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
And usually musicians hate this when I ask this question because if they have to think about the record, it's like the worst possible question to ask.
Yeah, well, luckily for everybody, I'm not a musician then.
So I'm guessing it's probably going to be the book then.
It's going to be a book, and I'm not going to recommend my own one, obviously, because that would be way too egotistical. But I would say the one book that's probably inspired me the most in regards to helping me build my own personal brand. And I think every creative, musicians particularly, are building their brand more so than anything else. Understand when you build your brand, that becomes your reputation and vice versa. And so your brand is what people say about you when you're not around. So you've got to think about how you want people to discuss you and talk about you and think about you when you're not, in front of them. And so the one book that really helped me a lot in building my own personal brand was Gary Vaynerchuk's Crush It. And when I picked that up in very late 2009, maybe early 2010, I'm getting old, I can't remember that far back now, but I read it all in one sitting. And I've read it at least 2 times since then as well. It's just one of those books that just gets you fired up for what you're all about and the fact that the world needs you and your message and what you bring to that world. And it's just an incredible read and a very inspiring read as well. So that would be my one book that everybody should check out. Awesome.
Crush It by Gary Vaynerchuk. And final question, imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. So you've got the tools of your trade, which I'm assuming is a laptop, and the knowledge that you've acquired over the years, but no one knows who you are, and you've just kind of got to start from scratch. How would you restart?
So a couple of years ago, this would have been build a blog and start creating content and creating, urgency around people reading that content and consuming that content. Nowadays, things have changed a little bit. We've got mobile streaming apps, like Periscope, for example. Periscope has done incredibly well for me in building up my own community and my brand.
And I've watched a number of your Periscope now, and they're great because they're incredibly personal and they're useful as well.
Well, I think that's the key, is to try and find the balance between entertainment and a little bit of education as well, and maybe a slither of inspiration thrown in there too. But ultimately, that's what I would do. I would start, at the end of the day, I would start building my personal brand, James. I think a lot of people realize the power of a personal brand too late. And just imagine what we could do if we were all such egomaniacs from day one. You know what I mean? The world would be such a great place to live in. But no, I would honestly say to, focus it on building your brand. That's what I would be doing.
Great. Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. Share with our guests the best ways that they can connect with you and learn about Upreneur and the other projects you've got going just now.
Well, everything I do is over at my hub. It's at chrisducker.com. And, there's the blog, the podcast, Upreneur, the book, everything is over there. So chrisducker.com.
Awesome, Chris. Well, thank you so much. If people go to show notes at jamestaylor.me and put in Chris Ducker, they'll find all the links here that we've been speaking about as well. Thank you, Chris, and I wish you all the best with your continued success with your businesses.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Likewise to yourself.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.